Biden pressured Putin despite U.S. denial of involvement in Russia's attack. The short-term offensive in Russia confronts Joe Biden with the most dangerous situation that has ever plagued the last 5 American presidents: what to do with Vladimir Putin. Every U.S. president since Bill Clinton has tried in some way to relate to the former KGB officer, whose scandal over the collapse of the Soviet Union inspired his desire to return from the Russian occupation. Most are looking for some kind of reset in U.S.-Russia relations. However, none of this prevented the deterioration of the relationship between the two nuclear powers. Former President George W. Bush looked into Putin's eyes and filled his soul, so Putin attacked Georgia in his time. Barack Obama first saw the Russian leader as a partner in ending the threat of nuclear apocalypse. But that didn't stop Putin from reunifying Crimea in 2014. Donald Trump has taken a positive approach to dictators and enemies that America wants to follow rather than punish. Biden, a senator in Washington at the height of the U.S.-Soviet stalemate in the 1970s and 1980s, has fewer illusions about Putin than most. But even if he tries to keep his cool, meet his rivals at the Geneva 2021 conference. Western support has not only allowed Ukraine to fight the invading forces, it has sparked war, put pressure on Putin, and created a war that will lead to an exit that has been threatened by military leader Yevgeny Prigozhin over the weekend. Appearing before the cameras on Monday, Putin warned that if the head of the Wagner Group did not choose to stop his trip to Moscow, he would have no problem suppressing the opposition in a deal that would deport him to Belarus. But the showdown is widely seen outside of Russia as the greatest challenge to Putin's retention of power in his generation, and perhaps even the beginning of the end of his rule. So Biden faced a possibility that none of his Putin opponents thought possible: the end of modern Tsarism and the incredible possibility of destabilizing the nuclear superpower that could have global impact. Avoid ads. During the crisis in Russia this week, the United States and its allies made it clear that the eventual elimination of opposition between Putin and Prigozhin was a Russian intervention. After Moscow opened the front line on Monday, saying it was investigating whether Western intelligence services had a hand in the attack, Biden specifically announced the host ate and talked about how he can consult Western leaders on the right track. They agree with me that we need to make sure we don't make excuses for Putin. Let me stress that we don't give Putin any excuses to the West or NATO for that. We have made it clear that we are not involved. We have nothing to do with it, he said. Advanced, clear intelligence from Russia should be devoted to Putin, as it was last year, and will deepen his feelings. At the same time, Biden's speech shows his peculiar attitude towards Putin's philosophy. Biden also told Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that while sending millions of dollars in weapons and ammunition to fight for Ukraine's survival, the United States will not join forces with Russia and will do everything to avoid a conflict between NATO and the Russian military. Direct conflict will lead to world crisis. But the red line continues. When Putin ordered troops to cross the border last February, the flow of ammunition, heavy artillery, Patriot anti-aircraft missiles and tank equipment into Ukraine was considered a surprise. Still, Biden's protest over the weekend that the United States did not commit treason is an expression of reality. There was no U.S. support in the struggle between soldiers like Prigozhin and Russian leaders arrested for war. Prigozhin's leased weapons have been blamed for a number of terrorist attacks in Ukraine and Syria. Moscow's claim that the West was neutral in the attack is seen as an attempt to undermine the division aimed at overthrowing the Putin regime. It seems that they aim to persuade the Russian people to unite against external enemies. Putin has repeatedly described the Ukraine war as an offensive that the West sees as an attempt to deny Russia's rightful status as a global power. This distracts attention from the fact that sending troops to Ukraine violates international law, which leads to a conflict that reveals how to mistreat and equips the powerful Russian army, a shell of the Red Army invading the Soviet Union. Developing country answer. While the USA and its allies were careful not to show goodwill during the Prigozhin attack, Western politicians want to use this political advantage in the pressure of Putin in Russia. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said at a meeting in the United States on Sunday that although the United States did not participate in the attack, he saw a break in Putin's power. This is the explanation of what happened in Europe on Monday. Prigozhin's betrayal is an unprecedented challenge to President Putin's authority, and it is clear that cracks are opening in Russia's support for the war, said British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly. EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy Josep Borrell made a similar point after a day of talks between Western Union leaders. He added that the situation shows that Russia's military power is losing and that the conflict has also had an impact on Russia's political system. Some observers in the U.S. warn that it was too soon to release Putin. This makes me think that there is hope to keep Prigozhin's Wagner group going. I don't think he is a threat to Putin, and I don't think he gives Putin an air of invincibility. He accepted it. Putin's military actions are unrecognizable, without energy. Putin is unaware that no outside interference from Moscow's enemies will force him to retreat and bring soldiers home. In fact, his position may be so strong that if he is not paid, he may open a scam which threatens his leadership. This explains why thousands of Russian soldiers were sent to the meat grinder of the conflict, as Prigozhin called the Battle of Bakhmut, which made Russia famous and not good for its position in Europe. But Prigozhin now faces political fronts at home, as the war raged in Ukraine and Putin's cult of the unrivaled omnipotent dictator pierced through Prigozhin. If the Russian leader does not assert his authority, Biden could become the first U.S. president of the 21st century to challenge the Kremlin's dictator. Biden told reporters on Monday that the United States and NATO were not involved. Biden said he spoke with friends on the phone over the weekend and they were all working together to ensure that Putin has no tolerance for this against the West or NATO. We have made it clear that we are not involved. We have nothing to do with it, Biden said. It's part of the struggle in the Russian system. Biden and the administration refused in vain to immediately investigate the Wagner Group's 22-hour offensive on Russia's war in Ukraine, its mercenary leader Yevgeny Prigozhin, or Russia itself. We will continue to assess the impact of what happened this week and the impact of Russia and Ukraine, but it is too early to determine the development. The enemies of Russia hoped that the attack would be like this. They succeeded in dividing and weakening Russia, but they miscalculated. He described the enemy as neo-Nazis in Kyiv, their Western allies and other traitors in the country. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that Russia is investigating whether Western intelligence services had a hand in Prigozhin's attack. U.S. officials were careful not to appear to support Putin or his longtime patron Prigozhin in their press releases on Monday. "We believe the Russians decide who their leader is," said Kirby. White House officials are also trying to understand how Beijing digested the Wagner attack and what this will mean for future Sino-Russian relations. China and Russia are each other's biggest partners. The White House said Beijing was considering sending Russian weapons to Ukraine but did not proceed. The Indo-Pacific coordinator of the White House National Security Council, Kurt Campbell of the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. "I think I will." China sees Russia as an ally, partly to avoid attacking the United States alone. Et al. Discuss. With the Russian offensive and the consequent international sanctions on Russia's resources now leading to an attack, Ukraine and its allies will say, "Xi Jinping, you know, if you want your partners to stay in power, maybe now is the time. Give him something to end this war."